Hello, I'm Jonasz Rewiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express, and as always, I hope you enjoy the journey. This time around, we're going to focus on a topic that feels particularly chilling. It pertains to Belarus, and not their propensity for agriculture, but the relentless pursuit of one journalist who dared to, do journalism. His name is Andrey Gnyot, a journalist and activist whose only crime seems to be existing outside of Belarusian government-controlled narrative. So, what is the Minsk authorities' deal with this particular journalist, and what does Serbia have to do with it? Let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
The relationship between Serbia and Belarus is marked by mutual support and shared historical, cultural and political interests. Both countries share a similar stance on several international issues, including a commitment to non-interference in each other's internal affairs and opposition to foreign-imposed sanctions. This relationship was recently reaffirmed during a meeting between the countries' parliamentary missions, and Belarus expressed interest in expanding it.
I am convinced that despite external obstacles, Belarus and Serbia have many opportunities to improve their cooperation in trade, economy, humanitarian and regional affairs.
During the meeting, the Serbian delegation emphasized the respect their country has for the Belarusian leader.
We always emphasize that we have friendly relations with Belarus and especially with President Alexander Lukashenko, who is very popular and respected in Serbia. He is known there as a leader who is successfully leading his country.
The Serbia-Belarus relationship is not without challenges, however, particularly as Serbia continues its bid for European Union membership. The EU expects alignment with its foreign policies, including sanctions, which could strain Serbia's stance on Belarus.
And now, as always, let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. Currently in Serbia, Andrey Gnyot faces extradition back to Belarus, where, let's be honest, things aren't looking that great for him. Belarus is demanding his return, Serbia's government is considering it, and Gnyot himself is saying, quite understandably, and I quote, "I'll be tortured if you send me back." Which, based on the track record of Belarus, is kind of an understatement, really. Now, let's rewind a bit to give you the backstory here. Andrey Gnyot, much like many other Belarusians, felt the need to flee his homeland when President Alexander Lukashenko, also known as Europe's last dictator, decided that democracy was just so passé. After the rigged elections in 2020, when millions protested Lukashenko's victory, or so-called victory, Belarus started cracking down really hard. Journalists, activists, opposition leaders, if you so much as held up a freedom sign, Belarus put you on its blacklist, and that's where Gnyot comes in. In 2021, Gnyot left Belarus, knowing full well his days as a free man were numbered if he stayed. He decided to live outside of his homeland, where he hoped to live in some semblance of peace. He also continued his work as a filmmaker, doing commercials and music videos, and one particular commission carried him to Serbia. Unfortunately, Belarus and his government had very different plans for him. So, they actually told the government in Serbia that, look, this man has actually committed crimes, specifically related to taxation. So he was arrested, and now they are trying to extradite him, using Serbia's cooperation as leverage, and of course trumped-up charges as the reason. Because sending him back would mean almost certain imprisonment, and according to Gnyot, torture. It is a bleak picture for anyone hoping a free press, especially in Eastern Europe, where crackdowns on journalists are becoming alarmingly common. According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, Belarus is among the world's leading jailers of journalists. Independent media is almost non-existent. And while Belarus might be at the forefront of this assault on freedom of press, other countries in the region are watching, and some may be even taking notes. Now, you might be wondering, why doesn't Serbia just say, sorry, we're not sending this guy back? After all, it seems like the humane thing to do. Well, it is complicated. Serbia is not part of the European Union, and while they sometimes flirt with Western values, they also have deep intertwined relations with Belarus and Russia. Plus, Serbia's President Aleksandar Vučić isn't exactly known for his friendliness towards the press either. And let's not ignore the irony here. Andrey Gnyot's only crime is holding Belarus to account, and he is now essentially a political pawn in a much bigger game. This situation exposes a frightening reality. Authoritarian regimes are not only repressing journalists within their borders, but they're also using their influence abroad to hunt them down wherever they flee. Gnyot's case is a test for the world, and for Serbia in particular, to decide where they stand on the issue of human rights and the freedom of speech. And now, here to shed more light on the issue is Mantas Adominas, Secretary General of the Community of Democracies. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Hello, good to be here.
So the Andrey Gnyot case, it is emblematic for a number of reasons. Can you tell us why does it really matter in the greater scheme of things, not just the individual tragedy of the men involved?
It is a classic example how autocratic regimes use existing legal frameworks, so-called lawfare, to wage war against democratic activists, to pursue transnational repression. First, by using Interpol, he was arrested through red flagged Interpol request, and then using existing extradition treaties with Serbia to try and get him back to Belarus, where he obviously would be imprisoned. There is no doubt whatsoever about there is no courts, as we know, in Belarus. So this is an example how autocratic regimes pursue their opponents in the democratic world, and that's why it is so important that Belarus does not succeed, as it did with Roman Protasevich when they kidnapped the Ryanair flight.
That's exactly the example I was thinking of. Like, Lukashenko can be quite vindictive. He can be quite relentless in pursuing whom he perceives to be the enemies of his regime. So forcing down a plane, now trying to encourage the authorities in Serbia. I mean, let's start in the beginning, though. Why do you think Andrey Gnyot actually decided to travel to Serbia? Because this was 2023, wasn't it? Do you think he might have expected that Serbia, of all European countries, might actually be more amenable towards Belarus in this regard, given that Aleksandar Vučić and his government, well, they are not exactly 100% pro-European. And I'm just, I'm being, really, really subtle here in the way I'm actually describing this. What would you say was the reason? Could he have expected this to happen?
I think he should have, but he clearly did not. I think as we speak, the European aspirations of Serbia are being promoted by the Prime Minister of Poland, and I very much hope that this country does make up its mind, because there is no middle way between Russia, Belarus on the one hand, and European Union aspiration on the other. And this case is emblematic in the sense that it's not for the courts at this stage to decide. If the matter is in the courts, then the mechanism takes place. But what it should happen is political decisions to suspend extradition treaties with countries like Belarus, like Russia, like China, for example, where people cannot expect a fair court. In case of Andrey Gnyot, I think he did the same miscalculation as the Belarusian activists who, on the Ryanair flight, announced where they were on social media. He trusted that actually a largely democratic country would not be cooperating with a regime known for its persecution, and he was wrong.
I'm asking this question not to blame the victim, because obviously this is what we don't want to do, really. I mean, the blame lies 100% on the side of the Lukashenko regime, and possibly on the side of the authorities in Serbia if they finally decide that the extradition will go ahead. But it is just a question of basically how far will the regime in Belarus be prepared to reach? I'm asking this because there are many exiled activists led by Svetlana Tikhanovskaya herself, right? I mean, she is operating in exile. Do you think there is a risk that there might be more higher profile cases like this, even kidnappings, Because, I mean, would you put it past the Belarusian regime to try and kidnap someone?
Absolutely not. And as you quite rightly said, I mean, sort of this is not to blame the victim, but actually this is to send the warning to any Belarusian or Russian or Iranian or other activists who are traveling to countries which have too close ties to those regimes, which have economic interests. They might be open to such attacks. And yes, these regimes go quite far away to intimidate, because it's not just a vengeance on a particular individual. It's sending the message that opposing the regime is dangerous business. You might as well not engage in it. And so authorities in countries like Poland and Lithuania, where Svetlana Tikhanovskaya resides, they spend a lot of effort actually to prevent these things from happening. And it's not a secret to say that regimes like Minsk, like Kremlin, they're constantly trying to probe those defenses and to reach the people who are the most vocal opponents of the regime. Transnational repression is a very insidious and very dangerous phenomenon. Recently there have been intelligence reports about Russian units operating with increased frenetic activity in the free democratic world. So we be very much on the lookout, and we should pool resources, and things like extradition treaties, any legal cooperation mechanisms with such regimes should be suspended and denounced, I think, sort of as quickly as possible.
So this is a major point. I mean, it also brings to mind the instance where Ilya Ponomaryov, the Russian oppositionist who lives in Ukraine, the Russians actually sent drones against his house. So luckily, he was not seriously injured, but this also happened, right? So we have these repressions taking place on so many different levels. So why do you think Andrey Gnyot is such an important individual for the Lukashenko regime? Could this be a case of revenge? Let us go back quickly, just to remind our viewers that he was the man behind an organization which played a pivotal role in making sure that there will be no international hockey competition being held in Belarus in 2021, right after the rigged elections, right? Now, absolutely. Lukashenko really does love his ice hockey, doesn't he?
He does love his ice hockey. Autocratic regimes do love sort of sports, and sports organizations, because of the funding structure, let's put it this way, too often are blind to the concerns of human rights, democracy, freedom, just general legitimacy. They sort of sometimes are too keen to go and stage events in the countries known for their human rights abuses. In this particular instance, this did not happen, and that's partly to the vocal opposition from activists such as Andrey Gnyot and the organization that he created. And yes, ice hockey has a special place in Lukashenko's heart, next to potatoes. I think he's he's absolutely sort of keen on that. And so he was deprived of his, favorite toy, have ice hockey, where he could show himself off with this uniform and all that. And so yes, there is a particular vengeance, but also there is an opportunism of the regime. They are looking out for opportunities when people travel into unsafe territories where they could be incarcerated, kidnapped, attacked, or maybe even murdered. So we should not be sort of, and I'm talking on behalf, well, for all the activists, they should not let down their vigilance. And as someone myself who's been named one of the top 5 enemies of Russia in Lithuania, I know the list of countries that I should not be traveling into.
So now, we've mentioned the question of sports, just to briefly clarify. This is a part of a phenomenon known as sports washing. Essentially, authoritarian regimes are trying to create this sort of, veneer of respectability, saying essentially to the general public in the West, all across the world, look, we might be, under accusations of war crimes, and our democratic system might not be the way it is in Western countries. But look, we have international competitions. Our teams are doing great on the, at the Olympics and so on and so on. How important is it to see beyond this and to basically, avoid the temptation of trying to say, we're going to separate the question of athletes, sports organizations on the one hand and regimes on the other? Because unfortunately they do cooperate in countries like Russia and Belarus and are being used in the propaganda.
And a score of others. Yes, and whenever I hear slogans such as "don't mix up sport and politics," "don't mix up culture and politics," this is mostly sort of Russian or other authoritarian regimes propaganda speaking. Because because they do use, and it's not just a matter of taking pride in their achievements in the area where they sort of, whereas elsewhere in economy and human rights they're doing abysmally, but also it's a part of soft power tool to broadcast the image. Culture, I mean, Belarus is not known for doing that, but Russia, for example, on the one hand you have human crimes in Bucha, sort of massacre of civilians. On the other, there are sort of sworn lakes from Bolshoi theater being sent all over the theaters in the world. So cultural organizations, sports organizations should be aware of the fact that they're being used as tools of these regimes to broadcast the image and to entrench the sort of the soft power of these regimes, to buy support in free world countries. And then this is not a neutral territory. This has all to do with politics.
So they're conveying the message, and if they actually get taken, off the list of organizations being present at international events, they will say, "Oh, you're canceling us. It's cancel culture." They are going to, use the very language of disputing the West against the West. One quick question: do you think that Andrey Gnyot, in the end, will be extradited? Apparently, Serbia doesn't have a very good track record when it comes to protecting human rights and refusing extradition.
Well, this is the consent that led 11 governments of the Community of Democracies, Poland among them, to address the government of Serbia to stop the extradition procedure of Andrey Gnyot and not extradite him to Belarus. Without publicity, without public pressure, without political pressure, this might happen, because there are economic interests, there is a political cooperation, so that's why we're speaking about it. That's why we have to keep those cases open. And there's a problem within democratic societies. We have this attention deficit disorder. After a while, it's just another case, but it's another human tragedy. I mean, Andrey Gnyot has already been in home confinement for a year. It's a year out of his life. Even so, if he's released now, it's already, Lukashenko had a revenge on him of sorts. I shudder to think what happened if he is extradited to Belarus.
He says this might actually end up in him being tortured.
Or sort of die in prison because of abysmal conditions, because of health neglect and all the things that happen to opponents of Belarusian or Russian regimes in prison. So our duty is actually to raise the profile of these cases, and I'm very happy that Community of Democracies, whose resides here in Warsaw, has been managed to join the European filmmakers, Amnesty International, and other organizations in calling for its release, 11 governments. So I hope that the Serbian government will understand that there is no middle way, that if it wants to cherish its European aspirations, cases like that cannot go forward.
And the Belarusian regime has a dark tradition of persecuting not just politicians, not even journalists, but also artists. This is not the first case of this kind. And even the man who was actually killed by the Lukashenko regime, most likely, Roman Bondarenko, he was an aspiring designer, but he was beaten most likely by Lukashenko's thugs during the protests. And, there is still no justice for him. So hopefully this will change. Hopefully the political prisoners will be given the attention that they deserve, and, that this will ultimately lead to their release. Over 1,300 political prisoners in Belarus are still waiting for it. Mantas Adomenas, thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight.
Thank you.
And now we're moving on to Eastern News Flash, a curated selection of all the other stories from the East that you really don't want to miss. Poland's President Andrzej Duda has indicated that Poland might transfer its remaining MiG-29 fighter jets to Ukraine, depending on NATO's commitment to securing Polish airspace. While acknowledging Poland's early and generous support for Ukraine, he noted that further assistance would jeopardize Poland's own security.
President Andrzej Duda has said that Poland may transfer its remaining MiG-29 fighter jets to Ukraine, contingent on NATO allies ensuring the security of Polish airspace and the delivery of replacement aircraft. Duda acknowledged that while Poland was an early and generous supporter of Ukraine during the war, its military reserves are now largely depleted. He recognized that political dynamics have evolved over the past 2 years, leading to Kyiv overlooking the initial Warsaw contributions. Despite these challenges, Duda expressed pride in Poland's past support for Ukraine, stating that Poland gave everything it could quickly after the war broke out. However, he lamented that the ongoing conflict has made it difficult for Poland to provide further assistance without compromising its own security.
Following months of stalled negotiations, the peace process between Armenia and Azerbaijan has gained momentum. Following a recent meeting on the sidelines of the BRICS summit, both nations moved forward to expedite discussions on an agreement on the establishment of peace and interstate relations, despite lingering disagreements on many key issues.
An agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan seems to be materializing. The latest talks centered around the delimitation of the border, with both nations still controlling disputed territories. While Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan claimed up to 90% of the terms of the peace agreement had been finalized, he urged Azerbaijan to sign the agreement in its current form, allowing for future adjustments. The president of Azerbaijan has previously been reluctant to leave unresolved issues, particularly Armenia's constitutional recognition of Azerbaijani sovereignty over Nagorno-Karabakh, a region seized by Azerbaijan in 2023. Now, however, his stance appears to be shifting. Russia, seeking to regain influence in the peace process, proposed mediating. However, Armenia rejected this proposal, with its foreign minister asserting the country's focus on direct negotiations with Azerbaijan.
Chechnyas Supreme Mufti Salah Mezhiev has condemned recent bans on hijabs and other religious clothing in schools as unconstitutional, saying such restrictions violate individuals' rights to freedom of conscience and religion. His remarks come in response to a decision by education authorities in Russia's Vladimir region that specifically target Islamic clothing such as hijabs and niqabs.
The Supreme Mufti of Chechnya, Salah Mezhiev, suggested that the ban might stem from a lack of thorough consideration rather than a deliberate campaign against Muslims. He emphasized that those advocating for such bans should demonstrate their commitment to national security by participating in Russia's military actions in Ukraine, much like the many Muslim fighters already involved. The resurgence of calls to ban hijabs follows a series of violent attacks linked to Islamic militants, which have fueled rising discrimination and xenophobia across Russia. Historical precedents include previous hijab bans in the Stavropol region in 2013 and Mordovia in 2015, both of which were upheld by the Russian Supreme Court. Notably, President Vladimir Putin has previously criticized the wearing of hijabs in schools.
And for this episode of Eastern Express, it's the end of the line. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates.